48 hours, 2 days. That is the startling, non-negotiable time frame at the heart of this deep dive. We are talking about a mandatory relocation. But this wasn't triggered by a fire or a flood or any kind of, imminent threat we'd normally expect.
No, it was an administrative decree, an order that demanded an entire community pack up its life, decide in just 2 days what truly mattered, and disappear.
And to really get the shock of that, we have to start where the sources begin, which is with the setting itself.
Yes, with the absolute profound normalcy of it all. This was, by all accounts, a completely unremarkable town.
Quiet streets, people working locally.
Children going to school just down the road. It was the epitome of ordinary, stable life. And the sources established that so meticulously because it's that stability that makes this sudden intrusion so jarring.
That's exactly our mission for you today. We want to cut through the speculation and focus strictly on the documented facts. We're going to analyze the timeline, the official language that was used, and the really profound, persistent gaps in the explanation that continue years later. We are tracking a vanishing act defined by a 48-hour clock and decades of unanswered questions.
And if we look at the prelude, the weeks leading up to this notice, the sources document no abnormal activity at all.
Nothing.
No warning signs.
Nothing. No unusual construction, no specialized vehicles, no public health warnings. There was just no sense of impending doom or even minor anxiety. Everything was proceeding on schedule, which, as you said, just amplified the shock when the hammer finally dropped.
So let's look at the mechanics of the decree itself. How was it delivered?
Well, this wasn't a warning broadcast over the radio or on TV. It was the opposite of a public announcement.
Right.
The sources described the trigger as the arrival of a formal notification, and these were delivered via hand-delivered letters.
Hand-delivered. That method feels so targeted, so private. It speaks volumes about the level of control required for the operation. What's crucial here is the immediate formality, the absolute authority implied by that delivery. These weren't just municipal notes. They were described as highly official, non-negotiable.
So the content didn't offer a choice?
It stated a command. Residents were instructed to vacate the area within 48 hours. That window was the hard, unmoving deadline.
Yeah.
And it's the sheer brevity of that window that demands our analysis.
Exactly. Why 48 hours? Why not a week? I mean, a week would still be hurried, but it would be manageable.
Right.
That question of why 48 hours is really the central engine of this entire mystery. If the danger was immediate, a gas leak, say, or a structural collapse, you would expect a traditional emergency evacuation.
With sirens, police intervention, the works.
And if the danger was long-term, like environmental contamination, you would expect a months-long transition period. 48 hours implies a threat that is rapid, certain, and requires immediate sterile removal, but with no immediate explanation.
And that leads us directly into the language they used, this linguistic firewall they constructed.
Okay, let's break that down.
The wording in the official documents is maybe the most carefully crafted part of this whole operation. The sources really spend time on the specific phrasing. We see phrases like mandatory relocation, for instance.
Not evacuation.
Not evacuation.
And why does that specific distinction, relocation versus evacuation, matter so much in a bureaucratic context?
Oh, it's highly significant. Legally, an evacuation implies a temporary necessity. The expectation is that you will return once the threat is gone.
Right.
Mandatory relocation, however, is a much heavier term. It signals a shift in the legal status of the land and of the resident's future. It strongly implies a permanent or at least indefinite change of residence.
Even if they tried to soften it.
Exactly, which they did. The other two critical phrases documented were public interest and the highly non-committal temporary measure.
That pairing is a masterclass in bureaucratic ambiguity, isn't it? You justify the severe action with public interest, but you soothe the anger with a promise that it's just temporary.
Precisely. Public interest functions almost like a legal trump card. It lets the government bypass detailed public explanation, citing a higher necessity that can't really be debated by private citizens.
But if it really were a temporary measure, that 48-hour deadline is still completely illogical.
It makes no sense. Temporary measures usually allow for the proper storage of belongings, for retrieval. A 48-hour mandate forces people to abandon almost everything they own.
And the sources confirm that residents were actively seeking answers.
They were. Meetings were hastily convened, but the residents' questions were never truly answered. We know from the records that officials repeatedly used those vague, non-committal phrases.
For your safety.
For your safety and based on assessments. But they never specified assessments of what.
So this is where the bureaucracy just maintained absolute control.
Yes. By repeating those nonspecific phrases, they acknowledged the residents' right to ask, while simultaneously refusing to supply any actual substance.
Yeah.
And the promise of future disclosure became their official shield. The instruction, documented in multiple source summaries, was simply further details to follow.
And what's so chilling as we track this is the fact that those details, they never came.
Never. The sources are definitive on this point. Years later, that official explanation for the urgency for the 48-hour requirement, it remains this critical, gaping hole in the timeline.
They prioritized removing the people over providing the knowledge.
Which suggests whatever they were hiding was more immediate and more dangerous than the potential civil unrest the order might provoke. That ambiguity, that enforced ignorance, it dramatically compounds the trauma of the physical move.
It forces people to make these life-altering decisions under extreme pressure without even knowing the real risk.
Was it physical? They didn't know, but they knew they had 2 days.
And here's where the sources offer truly powerful insights into the human element, the responses under that pressure. The sources detail 3 pretty distinct categories of reaction in that 48-hour window.
We see those 3 types. First, those who packed in silence, almost a hyper-focused, tactical approach.
Get it done.
Get it done. Then you had those who argued vehemently, trying to mobilize local officials, refusing to believe the mandate could be real. And then, perhaps most tragically, those who just froze, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the command, unable to decide where to even begin.
When you think about the human calculus forced by that 2-day limit, I mean, the implications of deciding what to save, it defines the entire event.
We aren't just talking about losing a house. We're talking about abandoning 95% of one's accumulated life.
The sources have these specific, poignant details about what was left behind. Large items, obviously, like dining room sets, heavy appliances.
Of course, but the surprising omission, the one detail that really tells you about the mental state of the residents, was the common choice to leave behind photo albums.
Photo albums. You would think irreplaceable, portable things like that would be the first thing saved. What does that suggest?
It suggests the choice wasn't purely about weight or portability, but about time and emotional energy. Looking through albums requires processing the past. It's an emotional drag, as some sources put it.
So in a tactical 48-hour survival scenario, they just couldn't afford the time.
Or the emotional space for nostalgia. They needed to move. And anything that slowed that forward momentum was jettisoned. It shows this profound, almost clinical focus, and it's driven by fear.
So conversely, what was prioritized?
The sources are very clear on this. Pets, for instance, were carried out. This highlights the prioritization of living dependence over inanimate objects, even sentimental ones.
And luggage.
Luggage was certainly prioritized. Suitcases packed immediately, stacked by the doors. This staging of luggage was almost universal. It was a signal of intent, of a readiness to comply.
And while the inside of the homes were being stripped, the outside, the exterior reflected this sudden stoppage of life.
Yes. Gardens left completely untended. The sudden halt of routine maintenance, flowers left unwatered, a lawn half-mowed. These silent details visually demonstrated the absolute, non-negotiable end to domestic life.
As the deadline approached on that second night, the sources described the town as feeling thinner. And the exodus itself wasn't chaotic, which is a key observation. Cars lined the roads, vans were overloaded, but the movement was orderly.
That efficiency is terrifying in its own way. It speaks to a reluctant but complete compliance. It's driven by the fear of resisting an official decree.
Neighbors said goodbye quickly.
Very quickly, seemingly avoiding those extended emotional farewells. There was this internalization that this was a functional requirement, and the quicker they did it, the less painful it might be.
And that efficient, rapid compliance was immediately met with a swift and indefinite closure.
By the precise deadline, checkpoints were instantly in place on all access roads. The operation was seamless. Anyone found still inside, those who froze or were actively resisting, was formally escorted out.
And the official reports
Described the entire process in sterile terms. They labeled it a successful relocation, achieved without incident. Compensation was mentioned, but the specifics remained vague.
a sort of bureaucratic handshake to smooth the process.
Exactly. But the timelines for future compensation, or crucially to town's reopening, were deliberately kept ambiguous.
And that ambiguity launched this agonizing waiting game for the former residents.
Weeks turned into months. People waited for the promised updates, for the further details that officials had assured them would follow.
But they never arrive.
No. Access remained strictly restricted. Requests to return, even just to retrieve a specific item, were denied across the board, always with the same standardized, sterile phrasing from the initial mandate.
So the town wasn't reopened, it wasn't sold, it wasn't destroyed.
It was simply closed. Its official status today remains a paradox. It's an administrative vacuum.
The paradox of the closed town is it's visually striking. Reports from the periphery confirm that from the outside, nothing looks wrong. Buildings are still standing. Infrastructure is intact.
It wasn't a casualty of destruction. It was a casualty of decree.
But inside, the physical evidence provides a chilling counter-narrative. The sources describe these as homes paused, not abandoned.
And that's a critical distinction. The internal visuals speak volumes about the immediate stoppage of life. A child's homework left open on a kitchen counter. A newspaper dated the day of the decree.
Curtains drawn halfway, as if the resident had just paused mid-task.
These are not houses ruined by neglect like an ordinary ghost town. They are domestic scenes frozen mid-sentence, waiting for an explanation that never arrived.
The physical structure holds the memory of the life that was so abruptly suspended.
Exactly. When a town's abandoned, things rot and decay naturally. When a town is paused, everything remains as it was, waiting for a permission to resume that has been permanently withheld.
Which brings the entire narrative thread back to the central contradiction of this deep dive. 48 hours was enough time to clear an entire compliant community, but it was nowhere near enough time to justify or even explain why that urgency was necessary.
And that urgency remains the lingering mystery. It's the fundamental, unresolved question that former residents and analysts still grapple with, all these years later. What was the specific, critical threat that necessitated the complete vanishing of a community in just 2 days?
And why has that initial decision, that 48-hour mandate, never been fully answered or justified by any official source?
The cold efficiency of the process just contrasts so painfully with the continuing silence.
The sources give us this narrative of disappearance without destruction, and that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. Think about the lasting trauma. The difference between a town that is physically erased by a visible disaster where you know what happened and can mourn, and one that remains visually intact, yet has its life permanently suspended by an unexplained decree. It is a town evacuated, but not erased, and its continued silence is perhaps the most eloquent answer of all.